Welcome to Cryptid Monologues. Let's dive into a world where myths meet imagination. Here we unravel chilling tales of cryptids, Bigfoot, Wendigos, Dogman, skinwalkers, and more. These stories are crafted to ignite your imagination. These stories are purely fictitious, and names and/or events are purely coincidental. If you like these kind of stories, please give a like and subscribe. Click on the notification bell to stay up to date. Thanks for listening. Let's get into it. Part 4. Building a Cabin for Protection. Etienne and Tahoe stood at the edge of their makeshift camp, surveying the valley with a critical eye. The new location offered promise. Fertile trapping grounds, a river teeming with fish, and a sense of uneasy peace. But both men understood the importance of protection. If they were to remain here for the winter season, a sturdy cabin was essential. "We can't rely on the fire alone to keep predators away," Tahoe said, his voice steady but firm. "A cabin will give us shelter, and walls will mean the difference between life and death if anything decides to test our strength." Etienne nodded, already envisioning the structure in his mind. "We'll need logs, sturdy ones, and time. This valley isn't going to make it easy for us." Without hesitation, the two men began their work. The first step was selecting a site for the cabin. They chose a flat piece of land near the tree line, close enough to the river for water, but far enough to avoid flooding. The location also offered a clear view of the surrounding terrain, allowing them to spot potential dangers. Using their axes, Etienne and Tahoe felled tall, straight pine trees. Each swing of the axe echoed through the forest, a rhythmic sound that became part of their routine. The work was grueling, the cold air biting at their exposed skin, but they pressed on, driven by necessity. Once the trees were down, they stripped the bark and cut the logs to size. Etienne's arms burned from the effort, and sweat soaked his shirt despite the chill. Tahoe worked beside him, his movements efficient and practiced. With the logs prepared, they began constructing the cabin. Etienne sketched out a rough plan in the dirt, a single-room structure with a small fireplace and reinforced door. Together, they notched the logs and stacked them in a sturdy frame. Their craftsmanship, honed by years of survival in the wilderness. The walls grew steadily higher, each log fitted carefully to prevent gaps that could let in the biting wind, or worse, something that prowled in the night. They left a space for a single window, covering it temporarily with thick hides until they could fashion proper shutters. The fireplace was their next priority. Using flat stones collected from the riverbank, they built a hearth at the center of the cabin. Etienne took care to arrange the stones tightly, ensuring the smoke would funnel properly through the chimney and not into their living space. The roof was a challenge. They fashioned it from overlapping logs and covered it with branches and mud to keep out rain and snow. The process took days, their progress slowed by fatigue and the constant need to remain vigilant against the wilderness. At night, the half-built cabin offered little protection. They slept in shifts, one keeping watch while the other rested. Strange sounds punctuated the darkness, a rustling in the underbrush, a distant howl that might have been a wolf but carried an eerie, guttural tone. On the third night, Etienne woke to Tahoe shaking his shoulder. "Something's out there," Tahoe whispered, gesturing toward the tree line. Etienne grabbed his musket, his pulse quickening. The firelight illuminated a pair of glowing eyes just beyond the edge of the camp. The creature didn't approach but lingered, its outline barely visible. Tahoe raised his bow, his arrow nocked and ready. "Don't shoot unless it charges," Etienne murmured, his voice barely audible. The standoff lasted for what felt like an eternity before the creature slunk back into the forest, its presence leaving both men rattled but unharmed. By the end of the week, the cabin was finally complete. Its sturdy walls and reinforced door gave them a sense of security they hadn't felt since arriving in the valley. Inside, they arranged their supplies neatly, placing traps, tools, and provisions within easy reach. Tahoe inspected the door one last time, testing the wooden bar they'd fashioned to secure it. "It'll hold," he said, his tone confident. Etienne sat by the fire, his musket resting against the wall. "We're safer now," he agreed, "but we can't get complacent. This valley has its secrets, and I don't think we've seen the last of them." The cabin became their sanctuary, a stronghold against the wilderness. Yet, as the fire crackled and the wind howled outside, both men knew the fight for survival was far from over. The return of spring in Aida. As the snow began to melt and the valley stirred with the first signs of spring, a renewed sense of hope settled over Etienne and Tahoe. The frozen river started to flow again. The forest came alive with the songs of birds, and the oppressive cold gave way to the fresh, crisp air of the season. The change was a welcome reprieve from the tense, silent months they had endured. For Etienne, it was a chance to breathe more freely, to remind himself that there was life beyond the shadow of the Dogman. For Tahoe, it meant preparing the land and their supplies for the warmer months ahead. One bright morning, as the sun climbed higher in the sky than it had in months, a familiar figure appeared on the distant trail leading into the valley. Tahoe was the first to notice, his keen eyes narrowing before a wide smile spread across his face. "Aida," he said, his voice filled with joy. Etienne's heart quickened. Aida, Tahoe's sister, had returned. Aida arrived with a pack laden with supplies and gifts, her steps light and confident. Her dark hair was braided neatly, and her smile lit up her face as she embraced her brother. "I told you I'd return," she said, her voice carrying the warmth of the season. Tahoe laughed, motioning toward Etienne. "And he survived the winter no less." Aida turned her gaze to Etienne, her smile softening. "It's good to see you again, Etienne." Etienne felt his cheeks flush, and he stumbled over his words. It's good to see you too. The valley feels brighter already." Aida laughed, a sound like a bubbling stream, and Etienne's awkwardness seemed to amuse her. Aida's arrival brought new energy to the camp. She busied herself helping with repairs to the cabin, cooking hearty meals over the fire, and sharing stories from her travels. Her presence seemed to fill the space with life, easing the tension that had lingered since winter. For Etienne, her return was both a comfort and a challenge. He found himself drawn to her warmth and confidence, yet hesitant to act on his growing admiration. Tahoe, ever perceptive, noticed his friend's glances and raised a knowing eyebrow but said nothing. Aida, for her part, seemed to enjoy Etienne's company. She would laugh at his jokes, ask him about his life in France, and often invite him to join her on walks around the valley. Etienne found himself looking forward to these moments, cherishing the way her presence softened the edges of his rough, solitary life. Despite the joy of Aida's return, the shadow of the Dogman had not completely lifted. While it had remained unseen since the thaw, the memory of its presence loomed over Etienne and Tahoe. Aida listened intently as they recounted their encounters, her expression growing serious. "My father spoke of such a creature," she said one evening by the fire. "He said it walks between two worlds, man and beast. It is neither friend nor foe, but a guardian of the wild places." "Guardian or not," Etienne said, his voice low, "it's a danger." Aida shook her head. "Perhaps. Or perhaps it watches because it wonders about us as much as we wonder about it." Her words left Etienne thoughtful, though they did little to ease his vigilance. With spring came fresh challenges and opportunities. The trio worked together to expand their trap lines, repair their equipment, and explore the valley further. Aida's insights into the land proved invaluable, and her cheerful determination inspired both men. For Etienne, each day brought a new appreciation for Aida's resilience and spirit. He found himself longing for her laughter, seeking her out in quiet moments and marveling at her strength. The harsh isolation of the winter now felt like a distant memory, replaced by the warmth of her presence. As the valley blossomed around them, so too did Etienne's hope. The wilderness was still wild, the shadows still deep, but the promise of spring and the promise of Aita offered a light that even the darkest corners could not extinguish. Summer of love. The valley was in full bloom as summer arrived, painting the wilderness with vibrant greens and bursts of wildflowers. Birds sang in the trees, and the rivers, now free of ice, shimmered under the sun. Etienne and Aida spent more time together as the days grew longer, their bond deepening with each passing week. They wandered through the meadows, gathering herbs and laughing at Etienne's attempts to name the plants in Tahoe's language. They fished in the cool streams, Aita effortlessly outmatching Etienne, much to his mock chagrin. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, their conversations ranging from dreams of the future to stories of their pasts. For Etienne, the wilderness was no longer just a place of survival. It was a home, a sanctuary where he had found something or someone worth staying for. Aita, with her wisdom and warmth, had become the center of his world. Tahoe, ever the observant brother, watched their growing affection with a mixture of amusement and approval. One evening, as Etienne nervously sought his blessing, Tahoe clapped him on the back with a grin. "Treat her well," Tahoe said, his tone both teasing and serious, "or you'll answer to me." Etienne nodded solemnly. "I promise." One clear summer night, under a sky bursting with stars, Etienne led Aita to a hill overlooking the valley. Fireflies danced in the tall grass, and the air was filled with the soft hum of crickets. Etienne's heart raced as he took her hand, his rough, calloused fingers trembling slightly. "Aita," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "when I came to this land, I thought I was seeking fortune, but instead I found something far more precious. You've shown me what it means to truly live, to love. I don't want to face another winter or another day without you by my side." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple ring he had fashioned from silver wire, polished until it gleamed. "Will you marry me?" Aida's eyes filled with tears as she smiled, her voice soft but certain. "Yes, Etienne, I will." As the leaves turned to fiery hues of red and gold, the valley seemed to glow with warmth and life. Aida and Etienne decided to marry before the first snow, their union a celebration of love, survival, and the beauty of the wilderness. Tahoe took charge of the preparations, enlisting the help of nearby trappers and native families. The wedding was held in a meadow, the towering peaks of the Rockies standing as witnesses to their vows. Aida wore a dress adorned with beads and feathers, a gift from her family. Etienne, dressed in his best furs, looked every bit the rugged mountain man he had become. They exchanged vows in both French and Aida's native tongue, a blending of their worlds that spoke to the strength of their bond. The celebration lasted well into the night, with laughter, dancing, and the sharing of stories. Etienne marveled at the sense of community that had grown around them, a stark contrast to the lonely days he had once known. As the fire crackled and the stars shone brightly above, Etienne and Aida stood together, their hands intertwined. The wilderness still held its challenges, its dangers, and its mysteries, but they faced it with the strength of their love and the support of those around them. In the heart of the Rockies, they had found not only survival, but also a life filled with hope, joy, and endless possibilities. And as the first chill of winter crept into the air, Etienne knew they would face it together, ready for whatever lay ahead. The return of the Dogman. As the snows melted and the rivers swelled with spring runoff, the valley awoke from its long winter slumber. Etienne and Aida, now seasoned in the rhythms of wilderness life, spent their days tending to their traps, repairing the cabin, and reveling in their new life together. Tahoe often joined them, his laughter filling the crisp air as they worked side by side. But with spring's arrival came an unsettling change. Strange signs began to appear on the edges of their territory. Etienne noticed deep claw marks etched into tree trunks near the outer traps, marks too large and deliberate to be made by any known predator. Aida found tracks in the damp earth near the riverbank, massive, canine-like prints that seemed to follow no logical path. The nights grew uneasy. The familiar sounds of the wilderness, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves, were replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by distant howls that sent chills down their spines. The howls were unlike those of wolves, deeper, more guttural, and filled with an unplaceable malice. One evening, as the couple sat by the fire inside their cabin, Tahoe burst in, his face pale and his bow clutched tightly in his hand. "It's back," he said, his voice low and urgent. "The Dogman." The following days were filled with tension as they fortified the cabin and laid traps around its perimeter. Tahoe patrolled the area with a relentless vigilance, his arrows tipped with poison he had prepared using local herbs. Etienne crafted spears and reinforced their musket supplies, his mind racing with plans for defense. Aida, ever resourceful, created charms from feathers and beads, offerings of protection to the spirits of the land. Despite their efforts, the Dogman's presence loomed. It didn't attack, but made itself known, its glowing eyes watching from the tree line at dusk, its shadow flickering in the firelight like a specter. Etienne woke one morning to find the cabin surrounded by tracks, circling closer with each pass. "We can't ignore it," Aida said one evening, her tone resolute. "If it wants us gone, it won't stop until we confront it." Etienne nodded, his jaw tightening. "Then we'll face it together." The sun hung low on the horizon as Etienne and Tahoe trudged back to the cabin, their packs weighed down with traps and supplies. The day had been productive but exhausting, and both men looked forward to the warmth of a fire and Aida's laughter to chase away the chill of the evening. As they approached, something felt wrong. The air was too still, the usual sounds of the forest muted. The clearing around the cabin bore no signs of Aida tending to chores or preparing dinner. Instead, the door hung ajar, its hinges creaking faintly in the breeze. "Something's not right," Etienne muttered, his hand tightening around his musket. Tahoe drew his bow, nodding silently. They moved cautiously, their boots crunching on the dirt path. The cabin was in disarray. Chairs were overturned, supplies scattered, and the fire pit was cold. A faint, coppery scent hung in the air, setting Etienne's heart racing. "Aida?" Etienne called, his voice trembling. There was no reply. Tahoe knelt by the doorway, examining the ground. "Tracks," he said, pointing to deep impressions in the soil. "Large, the Dogman." Etienne's stomach dropped as his eyes followed the tracks leading away from the cabin and into the forest. His heart screamed for him to rush after them, but Tahoe placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Wait, we need to be smart. If it's taken her—" Tahoe's words trailed off, unspoken fears hanging heavy between them. The two men followed the tracks into the forest, their weapons at the ready. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the woods in an eerie twilight. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound a potential threat. "Aida!" Etienne called again, desperation cracking his voice. A low growl answered from somewhere ahead, freezing both men in their tracks. Tahoe gestured for silence, his eyes scanning the underbrush. They pressed on, the tracks leading them deeper into the wilderness. Etienne's mind raced with possibilities, each more horrifying than the last. He gripped his musket so tightly his knuckles turned white. At last, they reached a small clearing where the tracks ended. The sight that met them stole the breath from Etienne's lungs. Aida lay motionless in the grass, her body marked with deep claw wounds. Her dark hair fanned around her pale face, her lifeless eyes staring at the stars. "No." Etienne fell to his knees beside her, his hands trembling as he reached out to touch her. The warmth of her skin was gone, replaced by the cold stillness of death. Tahoe stood behind him, his bow at the ready, scanning the shadows. "It's close," he said grimly. Etienne's grief transformed into a burning rage. He clenched his fists, his body shaking with fury. "This ends tonight," he growled, rising to his feet. The confrontation. A rustling in the bushes signaled the dogman's arrival. It stepped into the clearing, its massive form illuminated by the moonlight. Blood matted its fur, and its glowing eyes burned with a savage hunger. Etienne raised his musket, his aim steady despite the tears streaming down his face. "You took her from me," he said, through gritted teeth. "You'll pay for this." The dogman let out a guttural snarl and lunged. Etienne fired, the shot striking the creature in the chest. It stumbled, but didn't fall, its rage propelling it forward. Etienne grabbed a spear from his pack and charged, driving the weapon into the creature's side. The dogman howled, its claws raking across Etienne's arm, drawing blood. Tahoe circled the beast, firing arrow after arrow with precision. The dogman turned its attention to him, lunging with terrifying speed. Tahoe dodged, rolling to the side and slashing at the beast with his knife. The battle raged on, each man fighting with a ferocity born of grief and desperation. Finally, Etienne found an opening. He drove his blade deep into the dogman's chest, twisting it with all his strength. The creature let out a final, agonized howl before collapsing to the ground. Its glowing eyes dimmed and its massive body fell still. The forest fell silent, the only sounds their ragged breaths and the crackle of leaves beneath their boots. Etienne sank to his knees beside Aida's body, his hands trembling as he cradled her. "She didn't deserve this," he whispered, his voice breaking. Tahoe placed a hand on his shoulder, his own face etched with sorrow. "She was strong, Etienne. She would want us to survive." As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, they began the somber task of burying Aida beneath a tall pine tree near the cabin. Etienne carved her name into the bark, a small tribute to the woman who had brought love and light into his life. Though the dogman was gone, its shadow lingered over the valley. Etienne and Tahoe vowed to protect the land Aida had called home, knowing her spirit would always be with them. Thanks so much from Cryptid Monologues for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss an update. And hey, while you're here, check out these videos. You'll definitely love them. See you in the next one.